Hi, everyone. My name is Joseph Carson, and welcome to another episode of 401 Access Denied, a bi-weekly podcast, which is always focusing around the topics of internet security, safety, technology, and lots of fun. And I'm here based in Tallinn, Estonia, and the Chief Security Scientist at Thycotic. And we have a fantastic episode for you today. We've got a really special guest, which we'll introduce shortly. And I'm going to pass over to my co-host and awesome Mike Gruen, MG.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Yep, Mike Gruen, VP of Engineering and CISO here at Cybrary in DC. And as Joe said, we're joined today by Jessikka Aro. Jessikka, why don't you give a brief introduction and maybe a little bit of background about yourself?
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here. It's such an honor. I'm looking forward to speaking with you. I'm a journalist. I'm originally investigative journalist, and I specialized in Russia, information warfare, and extremism. And I started to investigate Russian trolls in 2014, and that really changed my life. But I also have found out a lot of really crucially important information about the Russian trolls, which brings me here today, I believe. That's what you're most interested in.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've got similar backgrounds. You're based in Finland, I'm based in Tallinn, Estonia. And, even prior to your experience, in Estonia, we have had experience back even in 2007. And even post when I came to Estonia, and it was around 2003, that even at that time, Estonia was it was still in between that mixed mode. It was still a lot of ties to Russia in regards to trade and economics and politics. But it was still moving in a different direction. It was moving towards more Western. It was becoming more, was it tied to Finland and Sweden and Norway? And of course, then, back in 2007, the political, cyber war that happened in Estonia, all because of a statue getting moved from one location to another, caused a lot of disruption. And we've also seen it in the likes of Georgia and Ukraine, is that when there's any type of political or any type of economical, that you do find that, we do have a big noisy neighbor, and they tend to use, the current technology capabilities today in order to create a lot of disruptions, whether that's interfering with politics, whether it's trying to even just, put bad images on people, individuals, or government officials or companies. We've seen a lot of it in regards to Olympics and sports. We've seen, even recently, of course, with the sanctions and indictments on, it came down to basically with the Olympics, past Olympics, that they have been targeted, and it came down to Russia, of course, because of the bans that they had. So we do find that, there is a lot of similarities in our backgrounds. And when I first met you, when I think it was around 2015, when you were telling the story, I was so intrigued. And I think it's really important, especially in today, especially when many of us are connected through social, especially even, working remotely and people being home, that we tend to be using the social sphere around us, the technology, in order to stay connected. And a lot of it can be done for good, but it can also be really abused. It can actually really impact people's lives. So, it gives it, before you end up, before you did the kind of, let's say, the investigation that led to your experience, what were you doing? What was your role in Finland? What was your job and your background?
Right. So I was a journalist, really a basic journalist, and I was pretty much very worried about what was going on in Ukraine. Back in 2014, Russia was already waging its secret warfare in Ukraine. And as I had seen before in previous conflicts, for example, the Russian-Georgian War, 2008, I noticed the same thing. There is so much propaganda, there are so much falsifications. It's really difficult for even a journalist who, we are supposed to be the professionals in filtering what is true and what is not true, and what is propaganda and what is political messaging, what is actually taking place in the soil of Ukraine. So I was pretty much trying to figure that out, because I'm a journalist, I have to tell people what is actually going on. I have to know. So even for me, it was overwhelming, as it was for many other journalists. And during that autumn 2014, I read super interesting reports made previously by independent, super courageous Russian critical journalists who had written in Russian media. There are still some free Russian medias. So they had already a year prior, they had written this so fascinating article. They had infiltrated in St. Petersburg, so not so far from Estonia, not so far from Finland, only a couple hundred of kilometers. They had infiltrated this weird office in which they were being paid to put up fake profiles and anonymous profiles and blogs, which were seemingly written by normal, everyday, opinionated citizens who were basically promoting Putin and Putin's policies. But they were getting a salary for it. So these brave journalists, they exposed it. They made articles in Russian media, and I read those articles, and I was fascinated and terrified at the same time, because I knew what you were saying about this international impact and influence. I was worried, what do these so-called trolls, as the Russians named them, what are they specifically doing online? We still didn't have much information. What kind of techniques do they use? And do they have impact in real people, even outside Russia? We also have Russian speakers in Finland, so who knew? Were they also impacted? So that was what led me into my investigations. Me not, feeling so secure about reporting about the war in Ukraine, and me wanting to know what is this new phenomenon of so-called troll factory, and how does it influence people, or does it influence people?
Absolutely. So what did you find out? I'm curious. I mean, what is, that's the big question, right? What is the influence that they have on people? How were you able to figure any of that out?
Yeah. So this is what I started to look into. My method was to basically put out a crowdsourcing article in which I asked people, the internet users, to help me investigate. So I told the basic information of the troll factory, what we already knew that was taking place and what was happening already. And I asked specifically people to let me know whether they had witnessed such troll activity online, and if yes, in which channels, and specifically how had real Finnish people reacted to these propaganda troll activities. That's one way of trying to figure out the actual impact. And so I started to receive messages, and I started to receive contacts. And in the end, I ended up exchanging emails, getting hints and tips, or interviewing around 200 people who were either normal internet users or moderators of regular media's comment sections, also filled with trolls, or very interestingly, for example, a moderator of the biggest Russian-speaking discussion forum in Finland, the Russian.fi. So I spoke with all these people, I followed so many tips and hints, and I found out that there was indeed impact. And the impact was that some people, because one of the troll techniques is to attack individual internet users after they voice out opinions or information about Russia. So these people who become attacked, they become scared and they stop discussing Russia issues completely. So the troll gets into their target. Also, some people got really confused. What is happening, really? For example, in Ukraine, because trolls were spreading so much disinformation about it. And also some people turned into propagandists. But then there was other group of people who told that there was no impact whatsoever. So, but the thing that worried me the most was that the trolls had already back then influenced the Finnish public debate of Russia.
That's interesting, because one of the things I find as well is that, back in 2007, there was much more, there was a lot of political propaganda, mostly from a media perspective, but wasn't really at that stage. I didn't find it on social media. You would have, I did remember that, of course, even Estonia is a large Russian speaking population as well. And they would be individually communicating, and there was protests, there was riots as well. But it was limited to people. People were getting involved. And one thing is and then it was also cyber attack. It was actually offensive, types of attacks. It was bringing down news organizations, defacing websites. And I think really when it got into Georgia was the first probably place that it started really getting into much more of a information propaganda, type of offensive capability. And then once it started moving into Ukraine was really that base grind of actually really, starting it to being, a tactical weapon in many regards that it was actually being then used. And since then, it's just been excelled. And I think to your point as well is that, in the past, probably prior to those events, it was probably being used mostly as an internal control within countries that was used to, control people, control media. Even I remember, is that when you control the education, you control the media, you control the TV, you control the news, then what you really do is you control the people, you control the conversation. And what I've really seen is that, when you shared your story, that it really started seeing that has now moved beyond the borders. It's moved beyond just trying to control your own people, but it's trying to influence outside and influences. And it did start with neighboring countries. It started with countries that were close to home. And what we've even seen is that has now expanded into other countries of influence, whether being trying to, I do, feel that, we've had many discussions, Mike, on things like the elections.
Well, at least Russia is staying out of the U.S. elections. We know that for a fact. They're definitely not involved here.
Yeah, it's a hoax.
Yes, it's fake. But ultimately, what I've become to realize, and after a lot of discussions, is that it's not about trying to influence an outcome. Is the outcome itself is to polarize countries, is to put them into the spiraling effect of actually having them fighting internally.
Well, that's if you could just so that, and that's what I was thinking when you were talking, Jessikka, about some people feeling like there was no influence and some people feeling like there was. Like, that's perfect, right? Because then you actually get a division, because then you have people who can't even relate. You're just started, and we're seeing it in the U.S. too, where the two sides just can't relate to each other because one side doesn't see any of the influence and one side or both sides see the influences on themselves, but not on each other. And so you get that division, and that's like perfect. That's exactly what you want, is it to sort of go unnoticed by a certain segment of the population for maximum, impact. So I thought that was really interesting that you sort of found that very early on.
That too.
Go ahead, Jessikka. Go ahead.
I would like to add to what Joseph earlier said about first internal control and then international. Let me tell you what we found when we also went to the troll factory. Well, we weren't let in, but we went to investigate it in 2015 February, while I was still doing the original investigation. It was super interesting because, of course, the place itself, it doesn't say that it's troll factory. It calls itself the Internet Research Agency. It's a company that investigates public opinion and whatever. And they were recruiting people. And of course, they were not recruiting these, social media propaganda trolls interfering in foreign elections. Yet they were recruiting on just, your everyday, normal, regular recruitment sites in Russian. Mm-hmm. They were looking for people as, for example, graphic designers and copywriters and social media managers. And they would prefer that those people would, of course, know Russian language, but also English. Mm-hmm. And they would be able to work in 12-hour shifts, also during nighttime. Wow. We called there. We pretended that we are someone who wants to work there. So we called there and we asked, what kind of material do you want me to produce if I come to work there? And they told it themselves. The recruiter lady, political, also news. So already back in 2015, there was English language political influencing operation underway. And as me and especially my colleague interviewed these original Russian journalists who had worked there before, one of them said that she was back in 2013 still writing only in Russian language. But she was writing obscenities about Russian opposition politicians and obscenities about US citizens. But this was for Russian audience.
Right.
But then in 2 years, it had already evolved into international.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, those, Georgia and Ukraine probably had a lot of impact in that factor but within Ukraine, of course, it is still a Russian-speaking, majority population. There's still a large Russian speaking there. So of course, Russian language would still be, but having English does mean it's moving kind of beyond those closing border countries to being more European and more US based.
Do you also see them sort of using that influence to then, once they sort of have these people with whom, they have influence, changing them into basically working for them as agents unwittingly, like where now I have this whole population of secondary trolls that I don't even have to pay. I just have to feed them some information. And that's really where the sort of snowball effect happens, because people trust those people and so on and so forth. It's,
yes.
It's almost like botnet. It's a botnet of real people.
Yeah, yes, zombies.
Exactly. It's like these Russian trolls, they turn real people into Russian trolls eventually.
Right.
As I referred earlier to some part of the population who accepts these troll falsifications as the truth and starts sharing them further on. And it's not even so rare to see even, high-profile, influential, supposedly intelligent people in society sharing fake news and troll materials further on. So it was quite alarming to see it, even in a country with high degree of high education. I mean, seriously, we in Finland, we have free universities, and there are still highly educated people who already back then were sharing these troll materials and fake news.
Right. And I think, though, that's an interest, the whole notion of trust is an interesting thing when it comes to humans, right? There's no way that you or I or anyone can do all of the research on all of the things and really get into it. So you have to start trusting people. I'm listening to you and you're talking to me about this, the Russian troll factory. I have to, at some level, I have to take your word for certain things unless I'm going to go through the entire process that you went through. And I actually wonder sometimes if societies that have that sort of higher education and where you sort of are learning and trusting, and you have, I wonder if it's actually that they're more susceptible to it, because you have this notion of trusted sources and intelligent friends and this network of people with whom you've just learned to trust. And it doesn't really take very much for one person to get in, to sort of influence that and take advantage of that. And I wonder if that's what also causes some of the breakdown.
That's an interesting theory. I specifically didn't research that, because there are also many other factors which are in play when it comes to individual citizens' ability or individual citizens' resistance towards propaganda and brainwashing. For example, here in Finland, in Estonia, Baltic countries, generally many Eastern European countries, especially parts of the populations are super resilient because they still know their grandfathers and grandmothers or mothers and fathers' stories about the Soviet occupation, about the Soviet aggression, about the Soviet propaganda followed by Soviet aggression. So we who still remember, we can also more easily then notice when something similar is again happening.
Right. No, that makes total sense. Right. I mean, I think, there's that sort of healthy skepticism. And, it's one of those things Joe and I talk about a little bit time and again about in the United States. In the United States, there's just this total healthy skepticism of the U.S. government. You always, it's just bred into everything about how the government started is be skeptical of the people in power. And so you have, I think you have this a sort of different dynamic, because I don't think we have the same propaganda. And so we're looking for alternate sources of information and have this healthy skepticism towards what should be actually a truth factory, but we're skeptical of them and look for alternates. And so I think the US in some ways might also be more susceptible than, say, other countries that have lived through what you're talking about, which is the actual propaganda machines and they can be passed on. That's an interesting point. And
there is a challenge, Mike. I think one of the things is that in a lot of countries outside of the US is that the let's say the interaction between the government and the citizens is much greater. The US seems to be sometimes in the past, it used to be an autopilot. You used to have the government kind of manage itself, and you'd have the Congress and you'd have the Department of Justice meant to oversee each other. So you'd have them all basically operating. So it allowed the citizens to take a back seat and actually focus on what they were doing. In other countries, they tend to be a lot more kind of interactive, and there's sometimes a lot more parties. There was a lot more closer elections. In the US. It's always that two-party race.
Right.
And one of the things that I get back to is, Jessica, one of the things as well for me, the internet trolls has been around for as long as I've been, on the internet, which goes back a long time. And you'd have, in the early days, there was name trolls. It was basically just people who that was what they actually enjoyed. that was who they were as a person. And then you got into the times where, of course, the early times of 4chans, 8chans, and the unnamed, the anonymous trolls, who basically just, they took the opportunity of being able to, express themselves more and be kind of really, that type, because they could be somebody else on the internet. For me, it was really kind of, and countries, governments have always been somewhat, propaganda is nothing new. It's been around, for the times where they were, dropping it in pigeons and, dropping leaflets for over the hundreds of years to try and just, get their message across. What really surprised me was that when you get into the internet research company, or the troll factory itself, was that it really became actually a agency. It was there in order to actually have a specific agenda. It wasn't citizens taking up their own kind of, let's say, passion or their own agenda or their own kind of influence. It really became an organization, became a employment. It became part of actually of what it was actually its goal and strategy was to do. Well, it was first done internally and then moved internationally. And that really got me scared, because the danger, I remember back, watching a lot of DEF CON conferences, and that, information and data is basically, that is what can change the outcome of many things, is that if you can modify, change it, it can really have a big influence. And this became a data manipulation, really kind of, factory. One thing that I always got in my mind was it 100% state sponsored? Is it something that is just purely a government only, or is it like a Cambridge Analytica style information, warfare type of, where it's about who's going to pay the most money for them to do that service? Is it an agency that's up for basically to hire, or is it more kind of influence from a government? Where does that agency stand?
That was also what I was wishing to find out when I went there. Before I went there was mostly rumors and, this hearsay talking that this place is probably governed by the FSB, the Russian Internal Security Service, the very infamous security service. But then it was difficult to prove. And also some Russian journalists had already dug into the connections, who was owning it and who was participating. It was one guy called, nicknamed Putin's chef, who is also an insider in Putin's regime. But still, there hasn't been, this, bulletproof, super 100% proof that it's the FSB who is controlling it. But I will tell you what we found. It was so interesting. They have the stupidest security guard in the history of mankind working there. Because you know what happened? When me and our really great Russian stringer was filming outside the factory, just outside the main exit and entrance, we were taking photos and such. It was the second day there. And the security guard came out from inside the factory and started yelling at us. And I was, of course, filming it. And recording it. And he was yelling, "Girls, you have to leave, or else I will call the police. Or can't you see, this is a regime izdani, so an administrative building." So in Russia, administrative buildings, they are what it says, they are especially secured by the Russian legislation. Actually, it's some kind of presidential decree, and they are some types of security structures such as police stations or nuclear power plants or military bases or something. So this guy told it, he wouldn't have to say it, but he just said it. So he kind of slipped it, what we were, looking for. So thanks for
I think
him.
my biggest disappointment is that they didn't call themselves the Ministry of Truth.
Yep.
Oh, that would have been brilliant. I think that's what the UK's factory's called.
So we were talking about your story, and one of the things, so I obviously in prep for this, I read a little bit about you, and so one of the things that I thought was fascinating was your own personal, how this all sort of what happened and your own personal role that, and how this impacted your life, because, obviously, investigating the troll factory, I'm sure they respected your boundaries and stayed away from you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want how much you want to talk about that or not, but I think that's a fascinating aspect of the story as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. So yeah, like a couple of days after the publication of my very first articles, I started to receive hateful phone calls and hateful messages in Russian language from places like Russia, Kazakhstan, even Ukraine. There was, for example, one phone call coming from a Ukrainian number in which there was only the sound of a shooting gun. So, but what was put in these messages was really alarming because people were truly angry at me. They were so upset. They were so disappointed. They were telling me that I should be put to jail and I should be I'm a pig and I should die and all this stuff. And I was thinking, where is this coming from? Like, really? So then I found that there was a string of Russian fake news being put out there in Russian fake news media. And so I realized, there are these people now reading these stories which are fake. So in the stories, it was claimed that I am famous assistant of American and Baltic security services or special services, and that I am gathering an illegal database of Putin supporters. So just fake information was being put out there, and I was being framed as a criminal, and people became angered by it. And that is the basic what is happening. What we're seeing is happening in so many different countries. There is so much fake information now that people become agitated by it, and then they go into the streets and do really aggressive, stupid things. So that is what is at the why disinformation and Russian trolls pose a threat to seriously to national securities, but also then to me personally. So that then continued and still continues. So this is over 6 years now. And where this originally came, this fake information, this is also so interesting. It's actually connected to Estonia too, and to Bronze Soldier clashes in Estonia, because the same guy who put out this fake information about me works for the Kremlin and works in Moscow in Putin's think tank, and which later was exposed of designing the whole troll and hacking and fake news operation against the US elections in 2016. So he had a motive there also. So yeah, so what to say, there is just no limit to what I am subjected to online.
Right, and it's the whole interest. I mean, it sucks, right? Because I mean, obviously, it sucks your personal story, and it sucks that happened to you. I'm sorry for that.
Thanks.
And I think the fact that you can have just sort of the asymmetric aspect of an individual trying to speak truth to power, and then this huge apparatus that can just sort of be turned against any individual and then turn you into a cautionary tale that's probably suppressing other journalists and other people from I'll go do a different story. I don't need to deal with that. And so it definitely has that silencing effect. And it's I'm glad people like you exist and stand up and do these investigations and look into these things.
Getting through the truth and transparency. That's really what we need as citizens, to know what's really happening in the background. A question I've got, Jessica, because one of the things is that this still trolling in our industry, in security industry, is a major problem. And there's a lot of people out there that really take people who's really doing a lot of good in the industry, and they're saying a lot, and they're very outspoken, they're very direct, and they're sharing their experiences, and they become really these targets of massive trolling. For you, was there a lot of support that was the community, the government, and other news organizations? Was there much support for you during that time?
Yes, there has been basically every step of the way. What I did as a counter reaction was that I started to publish information about this on my own social media, and quickly people came to help, and people came to rescue, and people offered me a mirror, and they were telling, this is all just this Russian propaganda, and this is just smear campaign against you. You should maybe file criminal complaints, and you're fine. Please continue your job. So this is the type of community that even grows and continues to grow today, and I'm really thankful for it. And all of this that you are doing now is also counter methods of how to counteract this, especially what Mike said about silencing effect.
Yep.
So it's important to bring these stories to light. I completely agree. But then I didn't expect any, for example, support from the government, because I'm a journalist. I work for the people. I am independent. But what I have received, in a kind of way from the Finnish government has been excellent police investigations into these cases, as well as the whole, justice system that has supported me along the way. And there are so many cases in the Finnish justice system about this, but they have just really done a great job. And even this guy who works for the Kremlin, at least he worked back then, he has also been convicted.
Oh, that's great to hear. And I think that's really important, because I remember having, here in Estonia a few years ago, we've had a lot of discussions around misinformation and propaganda. And every time there's an election, and literally every time there's an election, around whether it being local elections, governmental elections, European Parliament elections, whatever it might be, is that then the trolling 6 months to 9 months before just accelerates and elevates. And it's not even that it's coming from externally. It also comes from within. You're mentioning is that you do get these passionate followers who really kind of become zombies or become bots off the trolling. And I remember, earlier it was I think it was last year actually, we did this hacking democracy hackathons, and one of the groups actually did an algorithm, and they actually took a snapshot of point in time of all of the comments on news feeds and articles and social media posts. And he took it all up, and we tried to see whether it was center, type of communication, whether it was a little bit left, a little bit right. We were trying to figure out where it was. And we did find that actually, when you went to the very extreme side of things of comments, that we actually were able to trace it down to actually a single person. It's really that fundamental, is that 95% of all of the comments and posts were coming from one individual. And that individual had many identities, had many different personas, many different things, and they were just there to accelerate. And it got me into questions that, is that person really, are they being funded? Are they being paid? Or is it just they really have a lot of time to spend on this? And it gets into is, do you think that in these scenarios that, there is people within countries that are actually being funded in order to accelerate this, in order to create the trends, whether they're paying for local advertising or whether they're paying for ads in social media platforms? Do you see this as something as an operation that's not just being centrally operated from within the troll factory, but actually has moved into operations within countries?
This is an excellent question, which I have also tried to pay attention to, because it's quite obvious that the Russian troll factory, the one that has been exposed, is not the only one that exists, and it's not the only form of troll factories. And what seems to be the goal is for the Russian security services, who are basically controlling these activities, is that they use these so-called proxy operators. So proxy operators in a way that, so that they can tidy up and clean up the Russian fingerprints from these operations. So they specifically are interested in public social media influencers outside Russia, who they could bribe or threaten or pay to work for them. And there has been findings even in the USA where some YouTubers have been working for Russia as basically a troll and have been removed from YouTube. And similar cases like that also elsewhere. Also, it seems that it's so cynical, this whole operation. For example, Russian security services run operations in Africa. So, there, for example, they are also helping and teaching some African powerful elite to attack the citizens, and using the same methods as the trolls. So the spread of fake information and fake news on social media. So what is happening is that they are, teaching this stuff here and there, and some people pick up. Some people even want to do it without any money, free of charge, because as you were telling about these trolls, this is a form, normalizing this type of behavior. It's kind of weaponizing people's, this willingness to be nasty to other people. So there are some personalities who really love and enjoy doing this kind of stuff.
Right. They just enjoy getting a rise out of people, regardless of whether they believe it or not. And right. So being able to take advantage of people who want to do that. And I think you guys were talking. The idea of being able to monetize and make it into not just a propaganda factory, but also make money that you can reinvest in, and through YouTube and through any number of other sort of platforms is an interesting one as well. Just there's probably people who just sort of see it as a business opportunity, regardless of, just forget about the get a rise out of people. I can also make money doing this, just it's an interesting combination of factors.
Yeah, let me tell you one thing. I found from the Finnish YouTube, there are YouTubers who like follow and stalk and stream without permission and harass people and make false claims and smear and make so many communications crimes against Finnish police and journalists and other people. So they have these channels which are always taken down one by one, but then they put out new ones. And they also have advertisements in their channels. So you should have heard the reaction that I received when I started calling to these companies. These Finnish normal, your everyday like telephone companies and operators. They were really devastating.
They had no idea who they were sponsoring.
They didn't know. No.
Right.
So because they use media companies who are somehow under-resourced.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole way internet ads work is this very convoluted chain of millisecond bidding systems and other things. So it's possible that you don't even know where your ad is showing up. It's difficult to control at times. And
space bidding. You're bidding just for a moment of time and space.
Right. Yep. I did some work in that space a while ago, and it was fascinating to learn how that all worked and how how do you end up advertising on a site that you had no intention of advertising on or supporting?
It'd be good to have some good filtering in place that you don't support something you're not intending to.
Right.
So Jessica, one of the things that you mentioned as well is, I think reflected as me, I remember, as you mentioned, Estonia, one of the things that during, I think it was the European Parliament, there was a lot of trolling. And I even remember that I think it was one of the politicians here was put on basically the wanted list in the Interpol, and actually create a lot of influence, a lot of challenges. That all of a sudden now you're on basically an Interpol's wanted list, and when you're especially going through elections, that can cause a lot of challenge. Travel, you end up you can get arrested in other countries if you're on that list.
Right.
Now, one of the things is that in the law enforcement side of things, I think it was important that you mentioned that you got those get into investigations from a police perspective and prosecution and legal side if they are breaking local laws. And I remember speaking with the government officials here is that one thing is they can't influence what's in the media or press because they can't, in Western countries, they can't be seen to interfere with media. That's a boundary that they're not allowed to cross. But it's great to hear that at least from a police investigation side, if there is a law being broken, that they will get investigating into that. What do you recommend, though? A lot of this, there's things, of course, those influencers or those trolls that are within country. What about the cross-border side of things? Have you seen any type of, let's say, approach or any type of influence in trying to prevent it from being cross-border internationally?
Sorry, can you please somehow rephrase that?
So do you ever see governments trying to, let's say, if you've got trolling that's happening from another country, let's say coming from Ukraine, has Finland or the provider stepped up and tried to intervene or tried to do something, especially if it is something that's breaking a law within the country?
Unfortunately, I don't think I can recollect any that type of activities. About these counter activities, one example would be that, for example, Ukraine shut down whole V-Kontakte, the Russian equivalent of Facebook, or stopped and blocked it from use in Ukraine because it cited it's used for Russian information warfare and it needs to be blocked for attacks against Ukrainians. So that type, and then what else? Some Baltic countries have also shut down access to Russian propaganda sites such as Sputnik, and then but then let me think. I don't really recollect.
So it's more been basically blocking the access rather than trying to do anything like said.
One thing also I need to bring this up because it was quite interesting. Even during Trump's era, who was of course promoted and lobbied by the Russian trolls and Russian propaganda machinery, there was interesting operation done. Maybe you saw it in the news by the Cyber Command with signature from Mr. President Trump, attacking the Russian troll factory during the midterm elections 2018, because Troll Factory was also then trying to impact and influence the US population. So they shut down the Troll Factory. They blocked it from internet completely for one day. At least that's what they told the publicity. So that was quite interesting.
So question, what is your recommendations and moving forward into this? Is that it really gets into challenging because I think one thing we've seen in at least the recent elections in the US, where social media platforms have really stepped up and tried to intervene. They tried to label content, which is for me is one of my recommendations is always about is that the platforms are accountable and responsible. That's ultimately is they're accountable and responsible for all the ads and all the content. They're not in regards to they should be treated such as a media organization. Especially if they're editing and moderating and changing and filtering and classification. Therefore, they need to have some type of, let's say, context or source of trust into everything that's displayed, and actually some labeling. And they have stepped up and they did do a lot of that type of activity. Do you think that they need to do more, or they need to be somehow, what do you recommend from the social side of things? Because it is social media that is the main platform for doing this. What are your recommendations? What's your view for going forward?
Thank you so much for bringing this up, because we are at the core of the problem here. So I've seen them as the enablers of the Russian information warfare, as well as many other bad actors. But from my point of view, most importantly, they are the ones who give the space and channels to the information soldiers attacking us. And they are not doing enough in any front confronting this. And we have seen so many accounts from former both Facebook and Twitter employees who have told that they were in charge of security, or they tried to be in charge of security there. And they tried to tell and bring this up already early on, but they were rejected within the companies. And more resources was put only to build growth and not to build customer security. So what you said about the labels is completely correct. Also, we have to see these platforms as really faulty products. They are basically in consumer use being super faulty, super harmful, poisonous, dangerous. Think about, children who are using these products. And there are seriously kids who they don't have any warning labels telling them that this might be harmful, this might be violent, this, maybe you shouldn't watch this without the permission or, without being with your parents. But it's happening. And Zuckerberg, the CEO and founder of Facebook, has told himself that he really doesn't know how to handle this.
They were just testifying before Congress the other night. I was listening to it on my way home because I'm that person who listens to C-SPAN, the one. And it was interesting to hear them because that was the question because there's the election's not over in the U.S. There's what's happening in Georgia.
This election will never be over.
Well, no, not just that. There's the Senate race that's there's the special election that's happening in Georgia and coming up, and that's actually going to have a huge impact on the makeup of Congress in the U.S. And so, you have a what a great target, right? Like you have a small population, very easy thing to influence, and it's going to have a huge impact on U.S. policy potentially, depending on how you impact it. And so they were talking about what steps are you guys taking now? What are you doing? And basically the answer is, we're going to do the same things that we did for the current election. And it's like, well, that's not quite enough, right? They're just at a total loss because I think at the heart of it, as someone who's is a technologist and not a security person, but if I put on my business hat, there's no money in me resourcing the security and privacy and the fact checking and the rest of it, that's only going to come from either congressional oversight of some sort and say, or individuals deciding we're not going to use these platforms because they're just, I don't know what to trust and what not to trust. And maybe there's some platform that can actually get started. And, in my fantasy life, there's some platform that's going to start where that's like the foundation of it is like, hey, it's truthful and everything's validated and verified, but and people migrate to that, but it's never going to happen. And so I think the only way is for Congress or governments in general to act and hold these companies accountable, come up with fines and other things. I don't want the government deciding exactly what content should and shouldn't be seen, but they need to come up with standards and practices. I mean, it goes all the way back in the US. I grew up on Saturday morning cartoons. There were certain things that you could not advertise Saturday mornings during cartoons. It's not rocket science. It solves problems. It's just at a much larger scale, and it just and we have the technology, we have things that we can use to put towards it. It's just that there's no money in doing it right now. And so that's always what motivates, that's the problem with the capitalist society is money is what motivates the business decisions and the priorities.
Exactly. But I'm still wondering, how is it possible that after all these years and after, for example, the special counsel Mueller investigations about the interference against the US elections by Russia before 2016 elections, conducted through social media partly, as well as by the troll factories, how still, when we learned back then so much of how these trolls exploit these platforms and how these platforms generate this profit and how 126 million Americans were touched by Russian trolls on Facebook before those elections, and how sophisticated, seriously, you have to give the Russians credit for it, how brilliantly managed operations those were. And already then, after the the elections had happened and the milk had been spilled, already then Facebook and Twitter, they were confronted by the Congress. And they were asked why we're taking rubles and, but again, how long can they sit, in these hearings without doing nothing, basically?
Because Congress is the U.S. Congress is just completely blocked up. I mean, they can't they have no actual, they don't have enough of any one side to make any real change. And the Senate is, this deliberative body. They're designed to be slow moving and deliberative. I agree with you. I mean, it's mind boggling. At the same time, at the risk of getting into conspiracy theory, right? But you trace the money. I mean, imagine there's a number of those people in government who get funded by companies like Facebook and, their campaigns are financed by these big technology giants, and there's strong lobbies, and it's always about money. And so I think that there's enough people in Congress who don't have the incentive to act.
Yeah. So Jesse, I have a question for you as well. Is that we've known about the St. Petersburg and the troll factory for a long time now. Is there other countries and other troll factories that are appearing and upcoming? And for me, I do consider Cambridge Analytica as a troll factory. That was part of the trolling. It may have been a different mechanism. It may have been a company for hire rather than state sponsored. But when you're receiving money from a government, I do consider it state sponsored, irrespective of how the funding happens. So I do consider a Cambridge Analytica as a trolling style. It was information gathering and information kind of manipulation. Have you seen other examples globally that's started up, or anything you've been seeing in an international stage?
This was also something that fascinated me already since the get-go. And so already back then I asked experts, how about other countries? And at least back then, the experts were saying that also, for example, China, Israel are doing this, but they are not nearly as aggressive as the Russians. And also we are hearing really alarming reports from, you can say Chinese troll factory, attacking people, attacking individuals, spreading fake news, spreading political propaganda also on social media. So they are ramping up and probably learning from Russians as well. But then Also, the Israelis have been super aggressive, but their influencing and their operations, they have been more localized, and more targeted to their own citizens. So it's not international.
More stealthy. They are really good at staying under the radar. With Russia, tends to make a lot more noise.
Exactly.
And that gets me. So one of the things is, I agree, China has been, but China's done it in a very different approach. What they end up doing is that they create like for like social platforms, and then they censor directly in the platforms, which is, for me, is that I wasn't really worried about the data collection. I was more worried about how they are actually censoring internationally. It's about, there's one thing about censoring within your own country, within your laws, but when you're censoring content that is in other countries that other citizens are using, that for me is the where you're getting into trolling and you're getting into manipulation of data.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
So I want to move on to, you did, highly get recognized. You got, what was it, the, Courage Awards, and, for your bravery, because what you did was very brave. I mean, it's something that, really, it's something to stand up against, a major operation that has a lot of influence and a lot of powerful people behind it, that can, make a lot of challenges. And, you were very brave in what you did and courageous, and you did receive a reward. Can you tell us?
Well, nominated for, I believe.
Nominated. From the citizen perspective, you got the award. Irrespective of if you have a trophy behind you or not, it's a citizen. We do see as being, a recipient, and you have got it. But whether or not it's been stamped properly.
Yeah. So in paper, I was awarded with the United States State Department's diplomats, really highly recognized, basically human rights award called International Women of Courage. And they give out this award to 10 females around the world who have been making positive impact and who have shown leadership and all these, beautiful things. And the top diplomats in the US had already, it all was set. Everything was good to go. I was invited, and I was supposed to go to DC for award ceremony. And I had a program, and I had to cancel my, previous program in Finland of being able to travel. But then around 10 days before I was supposed to leave, to take off in a plane, I was informed that I will not get the award. And soon enough, the foreign policy paper, they reported that it was rescinded, cancelled, because they said of my social media posts critical of Donald Trump, the president of the United States. So then there was an investigation which actually confirmed those original reports. And yeah, that's it then. So I didn't go to the award in which Melania Trump would have given me the award, and I also didn't travel to DC, and instead I was actually attacked by a Russian troll factory in the aftermath of this
continues.
But as we said,
that was my award.
For all we know, the fact that you didn't get the award probably brought it to higher prominence. Like, they probably did more to sort of highlight it. I think there's probably more notoriety around that backstory of like being nominated and then not than having it rescinded. Probably got you more noticed by more people. So sort of probably backfired on the Trump administration and whoever else was involved in deciding that.
Yeah,
I really hope so, and I'm so happy. The US press is so lovely because you guys then supported me so much and gave so much, so much notion to my work, and it was awesome. It was really best award I can get.
I'm pretty sure that hopefully our listeners, I'm pretty sure there's a few governmental listeners out there, and maybe at some point in time that could change with a new administration in place. So you never know. So, but I think it's, for me, I think that it's important that leaders around the world have people that surround them that will challenge their, that will question and ask them the tough questions, and whether you like it or not. And I think it's really important, that you do have people around. We've seen it many cases that, if you surround yourself with people who do put you basically on the pillar and do challenge you to what you do and your actions, then it makes you accountable, makes you responsible, makes you a much better leader. And I think that's something for me. I think it's what you're doing is speaking out is what we need. We need more of. If I have too many people around me that just nods their heads and agree, it's not going to make me a better person. It's going to just make me more egotistic. And I think that's what really allows us to be that reality check, is that those people around us will bring us back to earth and put us back into reality. And that's what's important. And I think, I commend you for what you've done. And it's hopefully maybe something will change in the future. We'll see. So you have wrote a book on the subject. So
right. We've totally avoided I'd love for you to talk about the book a little bit and where people can get it and what's it. Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Oh, definitely. So Putin's Trolls, True Stories from the Front Lines of Russian Information Warfare. It's actually a collection of stories of people who became targeted for Russian crimes and Russian security service stalking, as well as fake news campaigns, just like myself. So these are Western people who live outside Russia's borders, who are being intimidated and harassed by Russian security service, who had their, for example, career destroyed, international media frenzies created, for example, after Russian security services tapped phone calls of diplomats and then edited and made fake videos, put them to YouTube and created chaos in 3 different countries. Also, so many, let's say, for example, Norwegian journalists who then ended up having to take the FSB to court. Of course, they lost all cases but in Russia. But these are people who brought out critical and important and factual takes on Russian policies, on Russian aggressive policies, and who were revenged. And these people also are my friends. Because I started to get to know these people after I started to tell what has been happening to me. And so I started to meet them, I started to hear their stories, and I wanted to document those amazing stories. And they're now in my book.
That's awesome.
That's fantastic. And we'll definitely make sure, one of the things that, we'll make sure, Mike, that we'll make it links and information about the book in the show notes so that everyone knows where they can get a copy. And I think it's really important. And, for me, Jessikka, you sharing your story with us and with the audience, I'm really hoping that we're able to take this much further, because I think it's really important that we get to the really, the foundation of the core problem, and that we find ways in order to embrace, technology for the good and not for the bad. And that we find ways in order to, let's say, technology can help us solve this problem. We can make sure that people step up and see it as a problem, because if we continue to ignore it, it's going to be more problematic, and it's going to polarize more countries, and it's going to make us, stagnant, and it's not going to allow us to innovate, and it's going to become people against people. And I think we really need to get all the good people out there to find ways forward in order to overcome this challenge. And it is a challenge that, and I think it's the foundational, of recently, what was it, the Social Dilemma on Netflix? I think that was, for me, it was another realization that really resurfaced a lot of what we see on these platforms. And we talk about oil. Data was the new oil, and for me, it's that time is the most valuable asset on earth. It's the time. It's the time that we have, and the less that we waste time. And trolls, for me, is wasting time. It's just basically attacking people, and it's wasting time and not productive. And we need to make sure that we actually reduce that and eliminate as much as possible. So again, thank you for
Zuckerberg's experience. But yeah. The Facebook and the rest of them all say, it's just algorithms, right? And I think what we have to recognize is that, right, the Russians are like these trolls, whether it's Russia, China, whomever, are really smart at figuring out how to manipulate an algorithm to do what they want. So that defense is just not a great one on its face, because the problem is, right, if I can exploit a system to do this thing, you guys built the system, you guys have to figure out how to adjust that system.
And Mike, we've discussed that before with Joss. We went through
exactly.
that. Kasparov didn't lose a game of chess. Right. He lost a game of algorithms. This is the point, is that, when you're playing, it's even go back to what was it, the DARPA program and the fighter jets, is that they were playing against basically artificial intelligence. But at the end of the day, it's an algorithm. You're not basically, it's the algorithm which is the problem. Mm-hmm. Fix it. Find a way to solve it. It's not to do with citizens having to make us, responsible, accountable for basically the algorithm's faults. And it all comes down to, and those in power, those who have the capability of knowing how the algorithm works, can abuse it and abuse it to their advantage, whether it being economical, political, even just basically, out of feud or,
Spite.
out of spite. That those who know the algorithm can abuse it. And this is the important part, is that many out there do know it, the algorithm, and they are abusing it even today. And we have to find ways to make sure either there's way to alternate that and make it a brighter, better future. So Jessikka, any final comments you want to say with the audience? Anything that you think it's important for them to take away from this?
Yes, I would love to I would like to actually add to what you just said about this political influence. One of the main things that I learned through my investigations was, many people are asking, what is Russia's end goal? What is the Kremlin trying to do? So this is what I learned. With these trolling operations, Kremlin's one goal is to cause regime changes. Because when they cause regime changes, they want to insert such leaders to, for example, countries' presidents' seats who are beneficial to their own political gain. And we have to remember, who are the people in the Kremlin? They are Siloviks. They are powerful, super rich, filthy rich people who have been using corruption. They have basically stolen from Russian people, and they have stolen the national oil and everything. So this is the type of people that you don't want to pick your presidents, because it will only bring you harm. So this is what we're dealing with. This is not just, some, false news being spread somewhere on social media. Like, this is real politics. And I have been terrified to see what type of individuals and characters the Kremlin has been promoting, and the Kremlin's propaganda machinery. It is Donald Trump. It is, far right. It is pro-neo-Nazis. It is, extremists. So this is not the type of, for example, Europe that we want to see in the future.
Completely, I agree, and it's something those that are close to it, in the not so recent past, is that we want to learn from experiences. We don't want to go back to those times. We want to embrace and move forward. So absolutely, it's not a place we want to go back to, because while some things were good, today is much better, and hopefully tomorrow will be even better if we keep moving forward. So again, thank you, Jessikka. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Mike, always fun having the discussion with you, and it's been awesome. And I think the audience is going to learn a lot from this. And I think this is probably a foundation for them even to go and find more information resources to help them learn more about how dangerous this can be, and also how impactful it can be personally, not just in career wise. So again, Jessikka, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. It's been awesome. For the audience, hopefully this will be educational, and it will make you think more about social media and really start looking into and learning more about what the truth is behind things, and not just what you see in 2 seconds in advertisements. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Take care, and catch us up every 2 weeks on the 401 Access Tonight podcast, and look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you.